Thomas Mitchell pulled his expensive coat tighter as the cold October wind cut through the downtown streets. At 58, he had everything money could buy, but the autumn chill still made him shiver just like everyone else. His black leather shoes clicked against the wet pavement as he walked quickly away from the glass tower, where he had just finished another boring board meeting. The meeting had gone on for 3 hours. 3 hours of talking about numbers, profits, and expansion plans. Thomas owned one of the biggest technology companies in the country, but lately, these meetings felt more like prison sentences. He checked his gold watch and sighed. It was almost 5 o'clock and the streets were getting crowded with people rushing home from work. Usually, Thomas would have his driver pick him up right outside the building, but today felt different. Maybe it was the crisp fall air, or maybe he just needed to clear his head after listening to executives drone on about quarterly reports. For once, he decided to walk the 6 blocks to where his car was parked. The financial district looked the same as always. Tall buildings reached toward the gray sky, their windows reflecting the last bit of afternoon sunlight. Business people in dark suits hurried past him, talking loudly on their phones or staring at their screens. Nobody looked up. Nobody noticed the trees that were starting to change colors, or the small shops squeezed between the corporate giants. Thomas had walked these streets hundreds of times, but he had never really seen them. Today, something was different. Maybe it was because he was moving slower than usual, or maybe because he wasn't buried in his phone for once. As he passed a narrow alley between 2 office buildings, he noticed a small sign he had never seen before. Rosa's Alterations, it read in faded blue letters. Below that, in smaller text, clothing repairs, tailoring, embroidery. The shop looked completely out of place. While everything around it was steel and glass, this little store had a wooden door painted bright red and a single window with lace curtains. It looked like it belonged in a different time, maybe 50 years ago when this area wasn't all corporate offices. Thomas almost kept walking. After all, what did he care about a seamstress shop? He had people who handled his clothes. If something needed fixing, his assistant would take care of it. But something made him slow down and glance through the window. Inside, he could see shelves lined with colorful fabrics and spools of thread. An old sewing machine sat in the center of the small space, the kind his grandmother might have used. The whole place glowed with warm yellow light that seemed so different from the harsh fluorescent lights in his office building. But it wasn't the cozy atmosphere that made Thomas stop completely. It was the young woman sitting at the sewing machine. She looked to be in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her fingers moved skillfully across a piece of navy blue fabric, guiding it through the machine with the confidence of someone who had done this work for years. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, nothing fancy or expensive, and around her neck hung a pendant that made Thomas's heart nearly stop beating. It was silver, about the size of a quarter, with an intricate Celtic knot design that seemed to twist and weave endlessly. The metal caught the light from the sewing lamp, creating small rainbows on the fabric below. Thomas had seen that exact pendant before. He knew every curve of that design because he had spent weeks working with a jeweler to create it. 15 years ago, he had given that pendant to his daughter Lisa for her 16th birthday. It had been custom-made, one of a kind, with a tiny engraving on the back that read, "To Lisa with eternal love, Dad." He remembered the day clearly because it was one of the last times he and Lisa had been truly happy together, before his divorce, and his obsession with work had destroyed their relationship. Lisa had disappeared when she was 17, just vanished one night, leaving only a note saying she needed to find her own way in life. Thomas had hired private investigators, offered rewards, searched for months, but Lisa had covered her tracks well, and eventually, the trail went cold. That was 15 years ago, and Thomas hadn't seen his daughter since. The pendant had disappeared with her. Now, here it was, hanging around the neck of a stranger who looked young enough to be his daughter's age. Thomas pressed his face closer to the window, trying to get a better look. His breath fogged the glass and he had to wipe it away with his sleeve. The young woman must have sensed someone watching her because she looked up from her sewing. Her eyes met Thomas's through the window, and he felt another shock of recognition. Not because he knew her face, but because something about her eyes reminded him of Lisa. They had the same deep brown color, the same slightly upturned shape. She looked puzzled by the well-dressed man staring at her through her window. Thomas realized how strange he must look, pressing his nose against the glass like a curious child. He stepped back, embarrassed, but found he couldn't walk away. The pendant gleamed under the shop's lights, impossible to mistake for anything else. Thomas had designed that piece himself, working with the jeweler to get every detail perfect. The Celtic knot wasn't just decorative. It told a story of eternal connections, of love that couldn't be broken even when people were separated. He had chosen it carefully, hoping it would always remind Lisa that no matter what happened between them, he would always love her. The bell above the shop door chimed softly as Thomas pushed it open. The smell of fabric and machine oil filled his nose, along with something that reminded him of his childhood home. Maybe it was the scent of the old wooden floors, or the faint aroma of coffee coming from a small pot in the corner. The young woman looked up again, this time with a customer service smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed a little nervous, probably wondering what a man in a $1,000 suit wanted in her modest alteration shop. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? That he was staring at her because she was wearing jewelry that belonged to his missing daughter? That he thought she might somehow be connected to the biggest heartbreak of his life? I noticed your pendant," he said finally, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "It's beautiful. Very unique." The young woman's hand moved instinctively to her throat, touching the silver piece protectively. "Thank you," she said simply. "Where did you get it?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his tone casual even though his heart was pounding. Her expression changed, becoming more guarded. "It was my mother's," she replied, her voice carrying a note of sadness that made Thomas wonder what story lay behind those words. "Your mother had excellent taste," Thomas said, stepping closer. "Do you mind if I ask where she got it? I've never seen anything quite like it." The young woman studied his face carefully, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shop's window and making the lace curtains flutter. The late afternoon light was fading fast, and the shop felt like a warm island in an increasingly cold world. "She never told me," the young woman said finally. "She died 3 years ago, and there's a lot about her past I never learned." Thomas felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Hope, fear, grief, all of the above, probably. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. "My name is Thomas Mitchell." "Rosa," she replied, not offering her last name. Thomas stood there in the small shop, surrounded by threads and fabrics and the gentle hum of the sewing machine, staring at a pendant that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. He had found it, but finding it had only created more questions. How had it ended up around this young woman's neck? What had happened to Lisa? And why did Rosa's eyes look so familiar? The answers would have to wait, but Thomas knew his life had just changed forever. The small shop felt even smaller now that Thomas had introduced himself. Rosa stood behind her sewing machine like it was a shield, her fingers still touching the pendant at her throat. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of traffic outside and the soft ticking of an old clock on the wall. "Would you like some coffee?" Rosa asked finally, breaking the tension. "I was just about to make a fresh pot." Thomas nodded, grateful for anything that might make this strange conversation feel more normal. He watched as Rosa moved around the tiny space, filling a small coffee maker with water and grounds. Her movements were careful and practiced, like someone who had learned to make the most of limited resources. While she worked, Thomas let his eyes wander around the shop. Now that he was inside, he could see details he had missed from the window. Hand-sewn cushions covered a small bench near the door. Delicate embroidery samples hung on the walls, showcasing intricate flowers and birds that must have taken hours to complete. Everything was clean and organized, but nothing looked expensive. "You do beautiful work," Thomas said, nodding toward the embroidery. "Thank you," Rosa replied, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "My mother taught me. She was incredible with a needle and thread." She handed Thomas one of the mugs, and he noticed her hands were steady despite the emotional weight of talking about her mother. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the fancy brew his assistant usually brought him, but somehow it tasted better in this small, honest space. "Tell me about your mother," Thomas said gently. "If you don't mind talking about it." Rosa settled into the chair behind her sewing machine, cradling her coffee mug like it was giving her strength. Her name was Carmen Santos. She came to this country when she was 18, with nothing but the clothes on her back and big dreams about making a better life. Thomas listened carefully, watching Rosa's face as she spoke. There was love there, but also pain and maybe some anger. "She worked cleaning jobs mostly," Rosa continued. "Hotels, office buildings, rich people's houses. She would take any work she could find, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs at once just to pay rent and put food on the table." "That must have been hard," Thomas said. "It was," Rosa agreed. "Especially when I came along. I was born when she was 21, and she had to raise me by herself. No family, no support system, just her and me against the world." Thomas felt a strange tightness in his chest. The timeline Rosa was describing would match up with when Lisa had disappeared. His daughter would have been 15 years ago, which would make Rosa about 23 now. "Did your mother ever talk about your father?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Rosa's expression darkened. "Never. All she would say was that he was someone she met while working, and that he wasn't the kind of man who stuck around when things got complicated." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had never cheated on his wife, never had an affair with a hotel employee or anyone else. But what if Lisa had met someone? What if his teenage daughter had gotten involved with an older man, someone who worked where Carmen cleaned? "Where did you grow up?" Thomas asked. "Everywhere and nowhere," Rosa said with a bitter laugh. "We moved a lot when I was little. My mother was always looking for better work or cheaper rent. I went to probably 10 different schools before I turned 16. She took a sip of her coffee and stared out the window at the darkening street. "The Pendant was the only constant. No matter how broke we were, no matter how many times we had to pack up and move, my mother never sold it or pawned it. She said it was too important." "Important how?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas could see she was deciding how much to tell him. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now. "When I was about 12, I got really sick. Pneumonia. We didn't have insurance, and the hospital bills were enormous. I begged my mother to sell the pendant to help pay for my treatment, but she refused. She said someone had given it to her, to protect, and she couldn't break that promise." Thomas felt his heart racing. "Someone gave it to her to protect? A girl?" Rosa said, looking directly at Thomas now. "A young girl who was in trouble and needed help. My mother never told me the whole story, but I gathered that this girl was pregnant and scared, with nowhere to go." The coffee mug trembled, in Thomas's hands. He set it down carefully on a nearby table, afraid he might drop it. "My mother had a soft heart," Rosa continued. "She took in strays, people, animals, anyone who needed help. She said this girl reminded her of herself when she first came to America, lost and frightened." "What happened to the girl?" Thomas asked, though part of him was terrified to hear the answer. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "She died. A car accident. About a year after I was born. My mother never got over it. She said the girl was like a daughter to her, and losing her was the greatest heartbreak of her life." Thomas felt the room spinning around him. The dates matched perfectly. A 17-year-old girl, pregnant and scared, turning to a hotel cleaning woman for help. A car accident that killed his daughter while he was searching for her in all the wrong places. "Did your mother ever tell you the girl's name?" he whispered. Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Lisa. Her name was Lisa." The simple word hit Thomas like a thunderbolt. He gripped the edge of the table, fighting to stay upright as the truth crashed over him like a wave. His daughter had been alive for months after she disappeared. She had been pregnant with this beautiful young woman sitting across from him, and she had died alone, far from home, while he was too busy with his divorce and his business to find her. "Are you okay?" Rosa asked, alarmed by the change in Thomas's appearance. You look like you've seen a ghost. Thomas looked at her through new eyes, seeing not just a stranger who happened to be wearing his daughter's pendant, but his granddaughter, his blood, the only family he had left in the world. Rosa, he said, his voice breaking. I think Lisa was my daughter. Rosa stared at him in shock. What are you talking about? 15 years ago, my daughter Lisa disappeared. She was 17, angry at me because of my divorce, because I was never home, because I chose my business over my family. She left a note saying she needed to find her own way, and I never saw her again. Thomas pulled out his wallet with shaking hands and found the picture he always carried. Lisa at age 16, smiling and wearing the pendant he had given her for her birthday. Rosa took the photo and gasped. Even across the years and the differences that hardship and pregnancy had made, the resemblance was unmistakable. She looks like you, Thomas said softly. You have her eyes. Rosa stared at the photograph, then at Thomas, then back at the photograph. Her world had just changed completely, just as his had moments before. If this is true, she whispered, then you're my grandfather, Thomas finished, and I've been looking for you for 15 years without even knowing you existed. The little shop fell silent again, but this time the silence was full of possibility, rather than suspicion. Two strangers had become family in the space of a conversation, connected by a silver pendant and a love that had survived even death. The photograph trembled in Rosa's hands as she stared at the face that looked so much like her own. Thomas sat across from her in the small shop, watching his granddaughter process the impossible truth they had just discovered. The late evening light filtering through the lace curtains made everything feel dreamlike, as if this conversation might disappear at any moment. I need to know everything, Thomas said quietly. Every detail you can remember about what your mother told you. Rosa set the photograph down carefully on her sewing table, treating it like the precious artifact it had suddenly become. It's not going to be easy to hear, she warned. My mother didn't like to talk about those days, but sometimes late at night when she thought I was sleeping, she would tell me stories. Thomas nodded, steeling himself. I've wondered for 15 years what happened to Lisa. Whatever you can tell me, I need to hear it. Rosa got up and moved to a small filing cabinet in the corner of the shop. She pulled out an old shoebox and brought it back to the table. These are the few things my mother kept from that time, she said, opening the box carefully. Inside were faded photographs, old receipts, and a small notebook filled with Carmen's careful handwriting. Rosa picked up one of the photographs and handed it to Thomas. It showed a very young Carmen in a hotel uniform, standing next to a girl who was clearly pregnant. The girl had Lisa's face, but she looked exhausted and much older than her 17 years. This was taken about 2 months before you were born, Rosa said softly. My mother worked at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown. She was on the evening cleaning crew. Thomas recognized the hotel immediately. It was where he had lived for 6 months. During his messy divorce, too proud to stay with friends and too angry to find a permanent place. The irony was crushing. He and Lisa had been in the same building, maybe passing each other in the halls, and he had never known. Lisa was living on the streets when my mother first met her, Rosa continued, pulling out more photographs. She had run away from home and was trying to survive on her own. She was sick, hungry, and scared. Thomas closed his eyes, imagining his teenage daughter alone and vulnerable in the city, while he was fighting with lawyers and focusing on his business deals. The guilt felt like a physical weight on his chest. How did they meet? My mother found her in the hotel laundry room one night, Rosa said. Lisa had snuck in to get warm and maybe find some food. Instead of calling security, my mother gave her a sandwich and let her sleep on the couch in the employees' break room. Rosa opened the notebook and showed Thomas pages of Carmen's handwriting. My mother wrote down everything. She said she wanted to remember every detail of the people she helped, in case their families ever came looking for them. Thomas leaned forward to read the faded ink. Carmen's English hadn't been perfect, but her meaning was clear. Lisa very sad today. She cry about her papa. Say he no love her anymore because he too busy with work. I tell her all papas love their children, even when they make mistakes. The words hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. Even pregnant and homeless, Lisa had been thinking about him, and he had been too consumed with his own problems to realize how much she needed him. My mother started bringing Lisa food every night, Rosa continued. Then she convinced the night manager to let Lisa help with simple cleaning tasks in exchange for a small salary and a place to sleep. Lisa was a hard worker even when her pregnancy started showing. Thomas found himself crying without realizing it. Tears ran down his cheeks as he imagined his daughter, barely more than a child, herself scrubbing floors and washing dishes just to survive. "The baby?" Thomas asked, looking at Rosa with new eyes. Lisa was terrified, Rosa admitted. She had no money for a doctor, no insurance, no plan for what would happen after the birth. My mother took her to the free clinic when she could, but mostly they just hoped everything would be okay. Rosa turned to another page in the notebook. My mother wrote that Lisa talked about her father all the time. She was angry with you, but she missed you too. She said you used to take her to the zoo every Sunday when she was little, and that you taught her how to ride a bike in the park. Thomas remembered those days clearly. They felt like they had happened to someone else, back when he thought he had all the time in the world to be a good father, before his business took off, before the divorce, before everything fell apart. Lisa wanted to call you when the labor started, Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. My mother was with her at the hospital, and Lisa kept asking for a phone. She said she wanted her father to know about the baby. Why didn't she? Rosa looked uncomfortable. Because she saw a newspaper. There was an article about your divorce, about how you were fighting for custody of her. The article made it sound like you were using her as a weapon against her mother. Lisa got upset and said you probably wouldn't want a grandchild from a daughter who had disappointed you so badly. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, but not at Lisa or Carmen, at himself, at his ex-wife, at the lawyers who had turned his family into a public spectacle. His daughter had been about to give birth, wanting to reach out to him, and the mess he had created had stopped her. I would have wanted to know, he said fiercely. I would have dropped everything. I would have been there. My mother believed that, Rosa said. She told Lisa the same thing, but Lisa was 17 and scared and had been hurt too many times already. Rosa pulled out another photograph, this one showing Lisa holding a tiny baby. Lisa looked exhausted but happy, smiling down at the infant in her arms. This is the day I was born, Rosa said. My mother said it was the happiest she had ever seen Lisa. Thomas studied the photograph, memorizing every detail of his daughter's face and trying to see himself in the baby she was holding. His granddaughter, born in a charity hospital while he was arguing with lawyers about money and property. Lisa lived with us for almost a year after you were born, Rosa continued. My mother had a tiny apartment, barely big enough for 2 people, but she made room for Lisa and the baby. Lisa got a job at a diner during the day while my mother watched you. She named you Rosa? No. Lisa named me Amy, Rosa said with a sad smile. Rosa is my middle name after my mother's sister who died young. I started using it as my first name after my mother died. Amy felt too much like someone else's life. Thomas nodded, understanding the need to create your own identity separate from painful memories. What happened? Thomas asked, though he dreaded the answer. How did Lisa die? Rosa's face crumpled with grief that was still fresh even after all these years. She was driving to her second job one night. It was raining and the roads were slick. A truck ran a red light and hit her car. She died instantly. The simple words carried the weight of 15 years of unanswered questions. Thomas had imagined many scenarios over the years. Lisa living happily somewhere else. Lisa angry and wanting nothing to do with him. Lisa in trouble and unable to reach out. He had never imagined her dead at 18, killed in a random accident while trying to build a life for her daughter. My mother was devastated, Rosa continued. She said losing Lisa was like losing a daughter. But she had me to take care of, so she kept going. She raised me like I was her own child, never letting me feel like a burden or a mistake. Thomas looked at Rosa with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Carmen Santos had given his granddaughter the love and stability that he had failed to provide for Lisa. A stranger had stepped up when his own family had fallen apart. "I spent so much money on private investigators," Thomas said quietly. "I had them search every state, every city. How did they never find any trace of Lisa?" "Lisa was using my mother's last name by then," Rosa explained. "Santos instead of whatever her real name was. When she died, she was buried under that name. My mother said she wanted Lisa to be remembered as part of our family, since her real family hadn't been there when she needed them." The accusation stung because it was true. Thomas had failed his daughter when she needed him most, and a hotel cleaning woman had picked up the pieces of the family he had let shatter. But sitting in this small shop, looking at his granddaughter surrounded by the work that Carmen had taught her, Thomas realized that love had survived even his failures. Lisa was gone, but she lived on in Rosa's smile and in the pendant that had somehow brought them back together. The search was over. The questions were answered. Now the real work would begin, learning how to be the grandfather he should have been from the start. The days that followed their discovery felt surreal to both Thomas and Rosa. Thomas went back to his empty penthouse that night with his head spinning, unable to sleep as he processed everything he had learned. Rosa stayed in her shop until nearly midnight, holding the pendant and staring at the photograph of Lisa, trying to reconcile the stranger she had just met with the grandfather she never knew she had. When Thomas returned to the shop the next morning with coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery down the street, Rosa's first reaction was suspicion. "You don't need to bring me fancy food," she said, not even looking up from the dress she was hemming. "I can take care of myself." Thomas set the bag on her counter anyway. "I know you can. I just thought maybe we could talk more." "About what?" Rosa asked, finally meeting his eyes. "About how you want to swoop in and fix my life now that you know I exist?" The bitterness in her voice caught Thomas off guard. He had spent the night imagining tearful reunions and grateful acceptance. He hadn't prepared for anger. "I don't want to fix anything," Thomas said carefully. "I just want to get to know you." Rosa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Get to know me? Where were you when I was 6 and my mother was working 3 jobs to pay rent? Where were you when I was 12 and sick and we couldn't afford medicine? Where were you when I was 16 and my mother was dying, and I had to figure out how to keep us both alive?" Each question hit Thomas like a slap. "I didn't know you existed," he said quietly. "Exactly," Rosa shot back. "You didn't know because you didn't care enough to find out. Lisa tried to reach you, and you were too busy with your divorce and your business to notice that your daughter was pregnant and homeless." Thomas sat down heavily in the small chair across from her sewing machine. "You're right. I failed her. I failed you both. But I'm here now." "For how long?" Rosa asked. "Until the guilt wears off? Until you get bored of playing grandfather? Until your fancy friends start asking questions about the poor seamstress you've been visiting?" The words stung because Thomas could hear the pain behind them. This wasn't just anger about his absence. This was the accumulated hurt of a lifetime of being overlooked and dismissed. "Can I tell you something about your mother?" Thomas asked. "Carmen, I mean." Rosa's hands stilled on her sewing. "What about her?" "She was stronger than I am," Thomas said. "She saw a scared teenage girl who needed help and she didn't hesitate. She opened her home, shared what little she had, and loved Lisa like her own daughter. When Lisa died, she could have put you in foster care or given you up for adoption. Instead, she raised you by herself, working impossible hours to give you a better life." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. "I've spent 15 years wondering what happened to Lisa," Thomas continued. "I hired investigators, offered rewards, searched every database I could find. But Carmen did something more important than finding Lisa. She saved her. And then she saved you." "Why are you telling me this?" Rosa asked. "Because I want you to know that I don't think your life needs fixing," Thomas said. "Carmen raised you to be strong, independent, and kind. I can see her influence in everything about you. The way you work with your hands, the way you take care of this place, the way you've built something beautiful from nothing." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the fabric in front of her. "She used to tell me stories about the people she helped, Rosa said finally. She said the most important thing in life wasn't having money or a big house. It was being useful to other people. She was right, Thomas agreed. I forgot that for a long time. I got so caught up in building my business that I forgot why any of it mattered. Over the next few weeks, Thomas made it a habit to stop by Rosa's shop in the evenings, not every day, and never without calling first. He learned to bring simple coffee instead of expensive pastries and to sit quietly while she worked rather than trying to fill every silence with conversation. Slowly, Rosa began to open up. She told him about the community college classes she had taken while caring for Carmen, studying business and design in her spare time. She showed him her sketchbook full of clothing designs, beautiful, elegant, pieces that reminded Thomas of the haute couture fashion shows his ex-wife used to drag him to. These are incredible, Thomas said, flipping through pages of detailed drawings. Have you ever thought about fashion school? Rosa snorted. Fashion school costs more than I make in 3 years. Besides, who would take care of the shop? What if money wasn't an issue? Thomas asked carefully. Rosa's face hardened again. I'm not taking your charity. It's not charity, Thomas said. It's family. Family doesn't work that way, Rosa replied. You don't get to show up after 23 years and start throwing money around to make yourself feel better. Thomas was quiet for a moment, stung by the truth in her words. You're right again. I'm sorry. But even as Rosa rejected his offers of help, Thomas could see her softening toward him. She started asking questions about Lisa's childhood, hungry for details about the mother she had never really known. Thomas told her about Lisa's love of art, her stubborn streak, her terrible cooking, and her infectious laugh. She was a lot like you, Rosa said one evening as they shared Chinese takeout in the back of the shop. Actually, she was a lot like you, Thomas replied. Independent, creative, too proud for her own good sometimes. Rosa smiled at that, the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from her. As winter turned to spring, their conversations grew longer and more personal. Thomas told Rosa about his loneliness, about how success had isolated him from everyone who mattered. Rosa told him about her dreams of designing clothes that would make ordinary women feel beautiful, about the fashion magazines she studied like textbooks, about the business plan she had written but never had the courage to pursue. Carmen would be proud of you, Thomas said one day watching Rosa add delicate beadwork to a wedding dress. The way you've built this business, the way you treat your customers, she taught you well. She taught me to be suspicious of rich men bearing gifts, Rosa said with a small smile. Smart woman, Thomas admitted. She was protecting you. From people like you? Thomas considered the question seriously. From people like I used to be, maybe. People who think money can solve every problem, who try to buy their way out of difficult emotions. And what kind of person are you now? Rosa asked. Thomas looked around the small shop that had become more like home to him than his expensive penthouse. I'm trying to figure that out. One evening in late spring, Rosa surprised Thomas by asking if he wanted to see Carmen's grave. They drove to a simple cemetery on the outskirts of the city, where a modest headstone marked the resting place of Carmen Santos, beloved mother. I come here every week, Rosa said, kneeling to place fresh flowers by the stone. I tell her about the shop, about my customers, about everything that's happening in my life. Thomas knelt beside her. What have you told her about me? Rosa was quiet for a moment. That I'm angry with you, but not as angry as I was. That I think you really loved Lisa, even if you didn't know how to show it. That you're trying to be better than you were. Am I succeeding? Rosa looked at him, this man who had walked into her life and turned everything upside down. You're learning, she said finally. Carmen always said that was the most important thing anyone could do. As they stood to leave, Thomas noticed Rosa touching the pendant at her throat. The same gesture he had seen that first day in the shop. It's beautiful how it caught the light that day, Thomas said. If I hadn't seen it, I might have walked right past your shop. Carmen used to say that everything happens for a reason, Rosa replied. Maybe the pendant was trying to bring us together. Maybe it was, Thomas agreed, thinking about his daughter's final gift, a connection that had survived death, distance, and 15 years of separation. The bridge between their two worlds was still fragile, still under construction, but it was real, built on honest conversations, shared memories, and the slow, careful work of learning to trust again. 6 months after that first evening in Rosa's shop, Thomas found himself doing something he never thought possible, learning how to thread a sewing machine. His large fingers, more accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts than handling delicate thread, fumbled with the tiny mechanism while Rosa watched with patient amusement. "No, like this," she said, guiding his hands gently. "The thread has to go under the tension disc first, then around the take-up lever." Thomas squinted at the small parts, feeling completely out of his element but strangely content. It was a Saturday morning, and instead of playing golf with business associates or reviewing quarterly reports, he was sitting in a tiny alteration shop learning a skill that his grandmother might have known. "There," Rosa said, as the thread finally went where it was supposed to. "Now you can help me with the simple hems." The shop had changed over the past months. What started as Rosa's small alterations business had slowly expanded into something more ambitious. The back room now housed bolts of beautiful fabric that Rosa had carefully selected, and one wall displayed her original clothing designs, elegant dresses and tailored pieces that drew admiring looks from customers. "Mrs. Patterson wants to commission 3 more pieces," Rosa told Thomas as she organized the day's orders. "She's telling all her friends about the dress I made for her daughter's wedding." Thomas smiled, proud of his granddaughter's growing reputation. Word was spreading through the community about the talented young designer who could create custom pieces that made women feel beautiful without breaking their budgets. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had taken weeks of careful conversations before Rosa had finally agreed to let Thomas help in any way. Even then she had strict rules. "I'm not taking your money," she had said firmly, "but if you want to co-sign a small business loan so I can buy better equipment and more fabric, I suppose that would be okay." Thomas had wanted to simply write her a check for whatever she needed, but he had learned to respect Rosa's independence. The loan was modest by his standards, enough to upgrade her sewing machines and expand her inventory, but small enough that Rosa could handle the payments herself. "I want to earn this," she had explained. "Carmen taught me that anything worth having was worth working for." More importantly to Thomas, Rosa had finally agreed to apply to fashion design school, not the expensive private institutions that Thomas had initially suggested, but a respected program at the local state university where she could study part-time while keeping her shop running. "I got accepted," Rosa had told him one evening in March, trying to hide her excitement behind casual words. Thomas had felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. "Congratulations," he had said, meaning it more than any congratulations he had ever given to business partners or colleagues. "Classes start in the fall," Rosa had continued. "It's going to be hard working and studying at the same time." "You can do it," Thomas had said without hesitation. "You're stronger than you know." Now watching Rosa sketch a new design while he struggled with basic sewing tasks, Thomas marveled at how much his life had changed. His penthouse apartment, once his sanctuary, felt cold and empty compared to the warmth of Rosa's shop. His expensive dinners at exclusive restaurants couldn't compare to the simple meals they shared while working together on busy evenings. "I've been thinking," Rosa said, not looking up from her sketchbook, "about expanding the shop." "Oh?" Thomas tried to keep his voice neutral, not wanting to seem too eager to help. "Mrs. Chen next door is retiring. She's been running that little gift shop for 30 years, but her arthritis is getting worse. She asked if I might be interested in renting her space." Thomas set down the hem he was working on. "What would you do with more space?" "I could have a proper showroom for my designs," Rosa said, her eyes lighting up with possibilities. "And maybe a small workshop where I could teach sewing classes to other women in the neighborhood. Carmen always said it was important to pass on what you know." The mention of Carmen still brought a bittersweet ache to Thomas's chest. He had never met the woman who saved his daughter and raised his granddaughter, but he felt her presence in everything Rosa did. "What would you need to make that happen?" Thomas asked carefully. "More than I have," Rosa admitted. "But I've been saving every extra penny, and if business keeps growing—" Thomas bit back his first impulse, which was to offer to buy the space outright. Instead, he said, "Would you like me to look at the numbers with you? I've learned a few things about business expansion over the years." Rosa smiled at his careful phrasing. They both knew he could solve her financial problems with a single phone call, but they also both knew that wasn't what she needed from him. "I'd like that," she said. As summer turned to fall, Rosa juggled her expanding business with her first semester of design classes. Thomas found himself becoming more involved in the day-to-day operations of the shop, not as the boss, but as a volunteer helper who could handle simple alterations and interact with customers while Rosa was in class. "Your grandfather is such a nice man," Mrs. Rodriguez told Rosa one afternoon after Thomas had helped her find the perfect fabric for new curtains. Rosa still felt a small shock every time someone referred to Thomas that way. For so long, she had thought of herself as someone without family, without roots. Now she was learning what it meant to have someone who cared about her success and failures, someone who showed up consistently whether things were good or bad. The relationship wasn't perfect. Thomas still sometimes forgot that Rosa was an adult who could make her own decisions. Rosa still sometimes pushed him away when his help felt too generous. But they were learning to navigate the complicated territory of being family. One cold November evening, as they worked together preparing for a rush of holiday orders, Rosa brought up something that had been on her mind for weeks. "I want to find where Lisa is buried," she said quietly. Thomas's hand stilled on the dress he was pressing. They had talked about Lisa many times over the past months, but somehow they had never discussed visiting her grave. "I'd like that too," Thomas said. "Do you know which cemetery?" "Carmen kept all the paperwork," Rosa said. "I found it when I was going through her things. Lisa is buried under the name Lisa Santos, about an hour outside the city." The following Saturday, they made the drive together through the autumn countryside. The cemetery was larger than the one where Carmen was buried, but just as simple. They walked through rows of modest headstones until they found the right section. Lisa Santos, the marker read, "Beloved daughter and mother." 1988-2006. Thomas knelt beside the grave, placing a bouquet of wildflowers, Lisa's favorites according to Rosa's memories of Carmen's stories. His daughter had been dead for nearly 15 years, but this was the first time he had been able to say goodbye. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I didn't find you in time." Rosa knelt beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. "She knew you loved her," Rosa said softly. "Carmen told me that Lisa talked about you all the time. She was angry, but she never stopped loving you." They sat there in comfortable silence. For a long time, 3 generations of family finally together in the same place. Thomas told Lisa about Rosa's success, about her talent and strength, about how proud she would be of the woman her daughter had become. Rosa told Lisa about Thomas, about how he was learning to be the grandfather she had never had, about how he was trying to honor the memory of the people they had both lost. As they prepared to leave, Rosa touched the pendant at her throat, the same gesture Thomas had first noticed in her shop. "I used to wonder why Carmen never sold this," Rosa said. "We were so poor sometimes, and this was obviously worth money. But I understand now." "Why?" Thomas asked. "Because some things are more valuable than money," Rosa said. "This pendant traveled from you to Lisa to Carmen to me. It's been carrying love across all these years, even when we didn't know where to find each other." Thomas looked at his granddaughter, this remarkable young woman who had taught him more about family and love in 6 months than he had learned in 58 years of living. The pendant caught the late afternoon sunlight, creating the same small rainbows he had first noticed that day in her shop. "Lisa would be proud of both of us," Rosa said as they walked back to the car. "Why both of us?" Thomas asked. "Because we found our way back to each other," Rosa said simply. and because we're building something she would have wanted, a real family. As they drove home through the fading light, Thomas realized that Rosa was right. They had created something new from the broken pieces of the past. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and honest and full of the kind of love that grows stronger over time. The pendant had done its job, carrying Lisa's love forward to the next generation and bringing together two people who needed each other more than they had ever imagined. In a small alteration shop in the heart of the city, surrounded by threads and fabrics and dreams made real, a family had found its way home.